Ever called a girl dull?
Or whistled at her walking down the street.
Ever stared at a woman on a bus or
said to your mate, I'd do that.
You ever give a girl a compliment? Like, nice.
And
Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Alison and this is a call-in show. Yay! We're here to discuss Cafe's new domestic violence shelter and also take your questions. And this is Men's Mental Health number 21. And just to introduce who's on the panel today, we have Prim Reaper. Hi, Prim. And we have Justin Trottier from Cafe. That's the Canadian Association for Equality. And we have Karen Strawn with a rare but very much appreciated appearance. And of course, your host, Brian Martinez. Now, before we get into it, I just wanted to do a disclaimer. Cafe's views are not the views of Honey Badger Radio. Cafe and HBR have different mandates. Cafe is offering services or developing services to men in need that are very much in a great need, because we don't really have them, in a heavily feminist-dominated industry, whereas HBR is dedicated to challenging ideologies that blame men, masculinity, and male sexuality for human ills without compromise. And we won't ever be compromising that mandate. But we have invited Cafe here to describe the services they offer and address any audience questions that might come up about Cafe. So, do you want to start with just discussing what Cafe is, Justin, and then maybe getting into the current services that are offered?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. Well, I'll give you a quick rundown for those of you who may be new to what we're all about. We're an educational charity. We're very active, in particular in Canada, and we focus on men's health and social services. That's a big focus for us, certainly, but we also do quite a bit of work in public education and in political and public policy work as well. And then lastly, we do quite a bit of research. So that's either primary research, actually doing research by kind of going into spaces and often interviewing men about their experiences with homelessness, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, etc., false allegations. That's one of our current research projects. And then a lot of our policies and our educational work, as well as our social services, are then based on that research that we do. So it's kind of a multi-pronged organization. It started very much about public education and research. And then when we realized that there were a lot of gaps in services for boys, men, fathers, and their families, we started opening these facilities called the Center for Men and Families. And we've now got these in 5 cities with more on the way. And so we've been very happy to be able to provide frontline services now since 2014. And I think at this point, we've probably helped several thousand families. So we're proud of that work. There's still a lot that remains to be done. This area is so underdeveloped, and men's services are so underutilized, even where they do exist, because we need to reach out to men and make these services available to them, make sure that they know about them, et cetera. So there's a lot of work to be done. And that's why I'm always happy to talk about them and see how people can assist us where it's appropriate to do so.
All right. So you have a new you wanted to talk about your cafe shelter. I was, I believe, in Toronto, as well as one I think you're opening up in Calgary. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. So we have just this year opened up what is Canada's first shelter for male victims of domestic abuse. And when we say domestic abuse, we define that very broadly. So that's anything from what most people sort of conventionally imagine as domestic abuse, which is physical violence, but it can also take many other forms. And that could be emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial kind of manipulation, even sexual assault. Men can be victims of sexual assault, which is surprising to some people, but increasingly, thankfully, there's an awareness of that. So we define it very broadly. It's also both a shelter for single men, but also for fathers with children. And that's a particularly unique aspect to it. And I think what makes it the first of its kind, there really is no place where a father can bring his child or his children. What has tended to happen, at least in Toronto, where we're active with the shelter, is that fathers and children will be separated. The father will, maybe be homeless. At best case scenario, he goes to a men's shelter, which will not take his children, and where he doesn't get any support services, and where he's kind of squeezed in, like a sardine. And his child is separated from him, and maybe the child stays with an abusive mother. or maybe the child goes to a youth shelter on his own. Obviously, none of those are ideal situations. So in this very difficult and tragic circumstance, the best thing is to keep the father and his children together. And that's what we're able to do. And there have been cases now, we've had over 20 families that have been resident at one time or another since we opened earlier this year. And we know that some of those fathers and children would have been separated had it not been for this space. And then, of course, there are many men who would have been sleeping in their cars, in tents, on the streets, if it weren't for a unique space for men experiencing domestic abuse. I'm particularly proud of the relationships we're building. Let me just kind of end on that note for now. What makes the shelters successful, because it's one thing to just sort of open a facility and put a sign up, but we actually have buy-in from police, from victim service agencies, from the rest of the shelter community, shelter sector, I should say, in Toronto. They're now referring men to us when they identify them as victims of domestic abuse. So police, instead of arresting the man or throwing them out of the house with no place to go, more and more, and I'm not saying all the police are doing this, it's a work in progress, but more and more they're aware of our facility and they're actually bringing the man to it and making sure that he is safe, or he and his children are safe.
All right, that sounds really great. I'm curious about some if you have experienced any particular difficulties with your services and pursuing them in any kind of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like have you trials and tribulations, perhaps? Like have you had to overcome obstacles in creating your services?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole kind of history of Cafe has been overcoming one obstacle after another. What I think has been unique about us is that we've managed to find pretty creative ways of actually turning the challenges into opportunities. And it's not always been easy, but it's because we have a really great team. Started as volunteers, now I've got some paid staff, but it's an amazing team. And so in the early days, and I've been on the show talking about this goes back some time, we were kicked out of like Pride Parade. That happened a few years in a row back in 2014, 15, 16. Then we basically stopped trying. We started going to some of the other Pride Parades, but not the one in Toronto. So that's still something that is unfortunately an issue for us. Pride has it in their head that we're a hate organization simply because we tell the truth about men's issues. And I think we do have that in common with Honey Badgers. We're not compromising anything. That's why we've raised the ire of, many on the radical feminist side. So there's Pride Parade. More recently, a couple years back, we were asked to leave unceremoniously from a street festival just down the street from where our office was located at the time. And we're fairly well known in the community. It didn't matter. There was a couple, I think 2 complaints from, we looked into it, some feminists. That they're associated with feminist organizations. And that was enough to cause us to be removed from that particular street festival. Now, interestingly, and this is unusual, but I want to give them props for it. The street festival, it's the Cabbagetown Street Festival in downtown Toronto, actually looked into us, which is something almost that they never do. And they came back and said, you know what, we were wrong. Please apply next year. Unfortunately, next year was COVID, and so they haven't had the street fair in a while, but that was actually a success story. We were able to not compromise at all on our point of view, but simply because of the work that we do and the fact that we are telling the truth, just as Honey Badgers is, we were able to be welcomed back into the street festival. But I'm not trying to sugarcoat this, because just 3 months ago, we were booted out of Volunteer Toronto, which is a really critical resource for us. It was one of the main channels through which we recruited volunteers. Now, thankfully, the organization's matured. We're no longer as dependent on a few specific volunteer recruitment portals. We're well enough known that volunteers are regularly reaching out to us. But even, as recently as a few months ago, we're still dealing with this sense people have that because we're talking unapologetically about men's issues, false allegations against men, parental alienation, and pushing for equal parenting, domestic violence by women against men, they label us with this brush hate organization, and we're still confronting that. And the reason why we've still been successful is because we have a huge groundswell of support from the public. There's enough people mostly in Canada, and we also have supporters outside the country, who are increasingly aware of the issues boys and men face, sometimes because they read about it, but often because they've experienced it themselves or their family has. And that's who's largely contributing, financially as volunteers, et cetera, to grow the organization.
Yeah, well, when I said that there's different mandate, Like, what I'm talking about is your mandate is to create services for men in need, whereas our mandate is to encourage an understanding that we need to develop compassion for men, which includes recognition that men have a right to exist as men. They have a right to their gender expression, masculinity, and not have it be maligned for not just problems of social ills like domestic violence and rape and other things that seem to be tarred as masculine, but also not have them be blamed for their own problems. And when you talk about the discourse around hegemonic and toxic masculinity and men's mental health, you know, and in my own personal research, I know that first of all, the discourse about blaming men's gender identity for their mental health outcomes is not only extremely unwelcome for a lot of men, so it makes a very unwelcoming atmosphere when people do it. It's very harmful to their sense of well-being, and it's also completely incorrect. There's no science behind it. And consistently, I've seen specifically feminists, and we have to bring up the F word because this is where this is coming from. I've seen feminist researchers, even with their own modalities, finding that it doesn't pan out. That men who are masculine actually, surprisingly, feel more able to talk to their friends. You know, they feel more able to cry in front of other men. They feel more comfortable telling people about their concerns than men who don't have a positive view of masculinity. So if we encourage men to have a positive view of their masculinity and recognize how masculinity is a force of good in the world, then they have better, what a surprise, they have better mental health outcomes. And they also feel more empowered to believe that they have the right to have services and access those services. So, so I mean, the difference, I'm not trying to say that you're necessarily compromising. I'm saying that we have different mandates, and our approach is that we take the position of challenging these narratives that blame men, that would make men self-select themselves out of any kind of help, because they believe that being helped as a man is taking something away from someone else, or that since men should solely be defined by their effect on others, which is another thing that comes out of these narratives of blaming men, that men should solely be defined by their effect on others rather than their own well-being, you know, and that will tend to make men not want to seek out help when they need it, because they feel like if they're a burden, then they are the problem that needs to be removed, that rather than having a problem that they have a right to have help with. So when I say that there's a difference, it's
It's kind of
ahead.
like the difference between social psychology and clinical psychology, right? Like I would have happily been a social psychologist because it's like, yeah, you don't have a clinical practice. I was like, oh, I would never want to be a psychologist because even though I'm like deeply interested in psychology, I would just get sucked into every patient's problems, right? And it would be extremely detrimental for me, right? Because I would be providing one-on-one services to people in their moment of need, as opposed to just basically doing the social psychology thing and looking at everything as if it's a petri dish, and you can maintain a level of detachment but still actually describe what's going on, right? And I think Honey Badger Radio is very good at describing what's going on, and Cafe is very good at sitting across, in a chair across from a couch, dealing with people one on one.
I was just going to maybe jump in there real quick to say that we've seen firsthand how much it re-victimizes men when they're blamed for their own problems, and that a lot of the men that reach out to us, whether it's for the mental health programs that we offer, suicide prevention, that's male positive, or we have some fathering groups for men in the context of separation or divorce. So very often these men have already been trying to access services, and the ones that are there predominantly are pro-feminist. And so they go in and they have these negative, and I would even say re-victimizing experiences, because they're being blamed for being men. They're being told it's their fault that their wife is abusive to them, for example. They must have, deserved it. Then they come to us, and we are very careful to vet all the facilitators that run our programs. So we make sure that there's an alignment. Of course, they have to have the professional training. Okay, so that is important. But we also make sure through their experiences, through interviewing them, through vetting them very carefully, reference checks, etc., that they do fit our philosophy, our pro-male, male-friendly, father-friendly kind of approach. I think, just real quick, the Fathering After Separation program might be a good example of this, because we don't only do mental health, we also do several sort of social services. We run a legal clinic. We provide support, legal and otherwise, to male victims of false allegations, as I mentioned earlier. It could be sexual or domestic violence allegations or other kinds. And the only other fathering programs are ones that assume the dad is a bad dad, right? They're called things like caring dads, right? And that is so insulting. I cannot stand that. And they're for men who have been abusive to their family, and some men are. But what ends up happening is, because it's the only program available, a lot of men take it. Sometimes they take it because they want to impress like a family court judge, okay? And it's the only program that's been available to them. So they take it, and now they're kind of being indoctrinated into this male toxicity-based framework. And there's actually now a movement within that particular program, Caring Dads, because it's one of the big ones. It's government funded. It's all over Ontario, maybe outside the province of Ontario as well. There's actually a movement. We're a part of this because we have some of our advisors who are in that program, but they're trying to change it from inside. And I think that's one thing I wanted to emphasize, is that CAFE is partly on the inside. And I know that maybe there's some folks who think that must compromise us, but I'd ask for people to look kind of, in a holistic, kind of open-minded way at all of the programs that we do, all the, content that's publicly available on our website or on our YouTube channel. We have thousands of videos up there. Most of our events have been recorded and put up, so you can watch that. And I think you'll appreciate, we have a very unapologetic, as I said, approach to being male positive and male friendly. We may not always get this 100% right, and where mistakes are made, maybe we appoint the wrong person to this project, we correct it. They're gone if they end up being the kind of people who are not supporting men in a positive, male positive way. So when we make mistakes, we own up to them and we learn from them and we move on. But when you look at the breadth of the work that we've done, then I think it's pretty clear that we're overwhelmingly on the side of men on their own terms. That's the last thing I was going to say, because that kind of takes us full circle. You asked a little bit about the history of the organization. When we started the organization, when we first opened the first men's centers, this was actually at the very top of our project plan. That what would distinguish the Center for Men and Families from other men's, and we were thinking here predominantly pro-feminist men's programs, because that's what was around, and what's still around, unfortunately, for the most part for men. It's that we would be about men on their own terms. We put that literally in our founding documents there. And I think we've stayed true to that. Not always gotten it perfect by any means, but our programs, they're living services. So we improve them, we enhance them based often on the feedback that we get from our own clients. So we're always open to feedback from the public about how we can do even better for boys and men.
Yeah, I think kind of the elephant in the room was sort of that one YouTube video from a little while back where that one fellow that was not part of CAFE was kind of talking about those not so male positive perspectives. And I think, just hearing about how we're going to be kind of mitigating that is kind of a big factor for a lot of people who are watching the shows at that time. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that as well. So, I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alison.
Yeah, well, I was gonna just bring something up. It's a little, as Prim mentioned in the beginning, it's a bit of a harsh take, but I think it's one that sort of needs to be addressed when you're dealing with an audience that's been burned by a lot of feminist stuff, and so sometimes when you present services for a group of people, that is being subject, in my opinion, is being subject to a fairly powerful narrative of blame and shame. And you offer those services, and if you appear to be offering those services in exchange for compliance with that framework, it starts to get people start to get the sense that no matter what the positive effect there is, it's negated by the expectation that men adopt a framework that's anti-masculine, if not anti-male. You understand what I'm saying? So even if you are offering services, if the hook inside the cheese or whatever is this kind of self-blame, self-hatred, and this denigration of masculinity, and this acceptance that masculinity is somehow inferior to femininity, the big thing is inferior morally, which I totally disagree with. So there's a sense that whatever good is done is negated. It becomes bait for a trap to promote the bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I can only tell you that the organization was founded to be, if not anti-feminist, then, as I said earlier, pro-male and male positive. And does that mean that we kind of go after feminism? Well, sometimes, actually, if feminism is in the way, we do. I mean, we've had billboard campaigns. We had a billboard campaign where the image was of an angry woman putting her arm up. I'm not sure people are seeing my video, but putting her arm up in a very aggressive posture, and a man was cowering and clearly was in fear for his well-being. And the line was 50% of domestic abuse victims are male. And we had we had a reference for that, and we had a link to our website for more information. And it was also to raise or to attract clients, to get men who were victims of female aggression into our programs. People, some of them loved that billboard, but a lot of them didn't. They didn't like the.
I remember you.
Go ahead.
You did an interview with someone from the Toronto Star or something like that, and she just spent like 5 minutes putting words in your mouth and accusing you of being, everything evil, and then you finally just had to say, you know what, I'm leaving. Yeah. I remember that.
There have been some fun experiences. I mean, I think if anybody, this isn't personal to me, but I am the CEO, so I guess I kind of symbolize the organization to some people. So maybe it's important for listeners to know I lost my last job because of my founding of Cafe. I lost a job with a secular humanist organization, it's complicated. It was part of an international organization. I was executive director of the Canadian branch of it. It was very successful for a time, but at the international level, it was a very feminist-based organization. In Canada, we managed to keep it, the feminists sort of out of it. We didn't talk very much about gender, but we certainly didn't go with what the other national branches outside Canada were doing, which was really pushing hard on the feminist side of it. And eventually I lost my job because I founded Cafe in the midst of a whole controversy in the so-called New Atheist movement, which some of you might know about. And I was on kind of the wrong side of that, the losing side of that.
Atheism plus.
Yeah.
Yep, we remember.
Sorry, atheism plus. That's what I meant. And it's been a while. I forgot that already. I at that point just sort of said to myself, okay, that part of my life is done because there's no room for me there. And one of the reasons I got involved in founding Cafe, and I wasn't the only founder, there were others, but one of the reasons I did it was because of those experiences. Those experiences awakened me to the fact that talking about men required its own organization that was unapologetically focused on the well-being of boys and men, because to do it in a feminist environment or an environment that was hostile to men in some way was never going to cut it. So for what it's worth, I think I've walked the walk in terms of being true to my philosophical position on this, which is that we will make allies and we will collaborate with people wherever they're on side with us. And if we can bring people on side, maybe they don't start there, but if we can bring them on side, we will work to do that. I think the mistake is when we say all feminists are the same, right? And they're all radical. And so we can't work with any of them. Because what we're actually doing is we're making them more united. We're making them more cohesive. We're actually pushing them together. What I would prefer to do, let you a little bit into my strategy, is find the more kind of reasonable people in other ideological movements, if you will, bring them closer to us, and then sort of use that as a way to begin to expand ourselves beyond just preaching to the choir, right? And so that sometimes means we're in very uncomfortable rooms because we don't always know if people are going to be the radical kind or the reasonable kind. But because we take that approach, we've been able to, for example, open the family shelter. To do that, we had to work with an advisory board that we built, and it included, believe it or not, one of the managers of the Assaulted Women's Helpline, it's a big organization and it's a lot of fairly radical feminist types, but not all of them are. And to have her on the advisory board was actually very practically important because it gave us access to information and even funding, but also by kind of putting her kind of front and center in some ways, it was clear to people that we meant to be inclusive. We haven't compromised. Go find evidence that the family shelter isn't actually supporting abused men who are victims of female aggression, the first of its kind to do that. But we still managed to get the Assaulted Women's Helpline, one of their managers, on board. And we also have people from victim services on board, from the police, even from Children's Aid. So we've managed to have our cake and eat it too, which is something I think those of us at CAFE are very, very proud of. But yeah, challenge you, go find evidence that the family shelter isn't legitimately helping abused men. And yet we've still managed to do this job of being inclusive and opening these doors so that now we get men into the shelter, and we're also able to get them services that we can't provide in-house because there's no way any organization can do everything. We have, for example, Second Harvest bringing food every week to these guys because we're seen as both a male positive organization, but also one that's doing some very credible services in the community. And that's a very, very hard line, tightrope walk, if you will. But we've managed to do it somehow. And we're very pleased that, that we've been successful. And I think it's because of that positioning, that we're very much male friendly, and yet we can be very accomplished in the work that we do.
Well, I actually have often said that if people like Paul Elam, Janice Fiamengo, myself, Alison, if we were to drop out completely, be destroyed, be Alex Jonesed, if you will, or Tommy Robinson, if you will, that you would be the new
Frontline.
Yeah, you would be the new wedge, the new vanguard, right? You would be the new person that would be the target of all of this stuff, right? So I've always seen, because I've always known that Cafe is, you collaborate, you do walk a tightrope politically, to remain apolitical. You definitely are not afraid of anti-feminists, but you're not explicitly anti-feminist. You're not an explicitly men's rights organization, right? All of those things, right? Because you have to walk that walk, right? And I think that there are people out on the frontier, right, who are giving you room to operate, right? And if we disappeared, or if we just decided that, okay, we're no longer supporting you, like Justin Trottier, right? If we did that, then you would be kind of the person who would be on the front line under attack all the time. You wouldn't be able to do the work that you do.
Well, it's
right?
like there's an expansion of the zone of operation, shall we say. So if something is that's a bigger threat, or presenting a more extreme, perhaps you might say, viewpoint, then they're going to see you.
I'm happy for them to attack me or
Yeah,
Paul
you're going
Elam, to allow you room to operate.
Yeah,
is really what it is.
Yeah.
So, because
that's why
it's
a nice relationship.
I got no time or patience to do one-on-one work with damaged men.
Feminists.
I got
Sure.
one damaged man on my hands, and that's enough, right? So, like this, the work that you do is not the work that I do. The work that I do is pissing people off, um, and drawing enemy fire.
Well, that's
You have a little bit of room to do what you do. And
okay. Let's put you could put it a different way. And this is how I presented it to some of the people who've been recently detracting from your organization. It's not Cafe's role to try to create an environment in which you don't have to compromise with, well, let's be frank, anti-male viewpoints, and anti-male organizations and anti-male ideologies. It's Honey Badger Radio's job to do that. I'm not going to speak for any other organization or person. It's our job to attempt to create a society where you can operate without these compromises. And the fact that you have to operate with these compromises is, our failure, not yours. And that's how I would say, that's what I went when I said we have different mandates and sort of different focuses. I'm focused on the idea of creating a society and creating an atmosphere in which you don't need to compromise with any kind of ideology that says things like men have constructed a society for the benefit of men at the expense of women, or men are primarily responsible for sexual assault, with no consideration of the cyclical nature of sexual assault, or men are primarily responsible for domestic violence, or false allegations are irrelevant. Due process is something we can, all of this, it all stems from the attitude that men and masculinity are somehow lesser or less important, or they are harmful, which is where the narratives of blame, and the fact that you have to operate within that kind of a landscape is, my fault, not your fault, is what I'm getting at.
I don't think it's our fault. I don't think it's anybody's fault. But
well, Karen, I will say that, because I've taken it that is what I hope to achieve, is to create a situation where compassion for men isn't seen as something it's not seen as deviant or strange or confusing, but it's seen as something that is an important aspect of being human. And I don't mean just compassion for men as in compassion for their harms and their vulnerabilities and all of that kind of, I mean a recognition that men experience the world, a recognition of their contributions, a recognition of their sacrifices in order to construct a society that we have, a recognition that they have a right to experience the world in the way that men experience the world and express that in the way that men express that. They have the right to their own language, they have the right to their own culture, they have the right to their own spaces, all of that. Like that's what I want to see happen.
Yeah, and they can talk shit about women all they want amongst themselves, the way women talk shit about men amongst themselves. And
but in many cases they don't.
Yeah, I know, because you know what? I hang out with men and I often kind of sit off to the side and I listen to men talk, and they don't talk in the kind of hostile, passive aggressive ways about their women that a lot of women talk about men. But about their own men. But what I I am less optimistic than you, Alice.
I'm not saying I'm optimistic. I'm saying that this is how I look at this situation. If anybody's to blame for this, it would be somebody who's gone out there and said, this is what I want to bring about in the world. And I haven't. I mean, yeah, it's like there's huge insurmountable odds to bringing it about, right? But there's no point blaming somebody who said, well, I want to go out in the world and create a men's shelter, for having to operate that men's shelter in a world where they have to compromise
in the context of a feminist-dominated society.
Yeah. In the context of a feminist-dominated society. There's no point saying that. So that's the way I conceived of all this. So anyway.
Yeah.
See, the way I've kind of chosen to see everything is like, ultimately we all kind of want the same thing, and that's why I've been so heavily involved with both HBR and Cafe, right? Is because I really, strongly believe that it should be obvious to everybody that men are human and deserve human compassion the same as everybody else. And I see both of us, like both of our groups, working so hard to achieve that. And it's not always exactly 100% the same way. It's not working like from the exact same like ideological like framework necessarily, although it is very similar. But we're all working towards that same goal. And I think that's why I was really excited about this show was because it was a really great opportunity for us all to get together and just remind everybody what it is we're all working together to do and what it is we are doing, right? So that's just my soapbox moment for the show. This is what I've always been wanting. It's for all of us.
The only thing I wanted to add to this, particular part of the conversation is that I think we complement each other very well, and I'm glad we have each other's backs. And at the same time, as friends do, if we think we've done something wrong, or let's just say something could have been done better, I think we should continue to challenge each other to get better. And I said earlier, sometimes we make mistakes. Since we put the elephant in the room kind of on display, the YouTube video, that a lot of people have been discussing, I think that was a mistake in how we handled that, and we've said that, but I'll say it again here. The issue, I don't think, was so much having that particular guest on, because we do want to let our listeners know that there are people out there with certain perspectives which they may not share, but it's still important to know those perspectives exist, especially when these people are prominent, when they have a profile in the community. But I think the mistake was not challenging that some of the comments that guest made, not pushing back on that, being too passive. And typically that's not us. I mean, if you come to our events or listen to the way most of our interviews are done, we will have people on that we don't agree with. We may even have debates. We've had some very high profile debates, but we do push back. It's very clear what our position as an organization is. And in that particular video, we didn't push back as we should have. So that's an example, of us being, I think, open-minded, admitting to an error, or at least something that could have been done better. And, the points well made by our critics on that. And we're taking steps to be more assertive and proactive, even in cases where we do invite guests on who we think do have something worth people knowing, but where the alignment is such that we really do need to make it clear this is Cafe's position, and we're going to push back in defense of that position. And that's what we'll have to do a better job with.
I think that's really what it was the lack of pushback. Joe Rogan invited Dr. Sanjay Gupta on his show, right? And they talked for 3 hours, and I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan was really freaking pissed off at Dr. Sanjay Gupta. But he made it clear, right? It was a friendly conversation. It was polite. It was civil. But Joe Rogan made it clear, like, here's where I think that my position is that the station, the news channel you work for, lied about me, and I don't think that's okay. And why didn't you push back on that? Why didn't you challenge that? Why did you just go along with that? You didn't say anything about that lie, even though you just admitted that it should not have been said, right? Because it wasn't true. So it's like, like, I mean, and okay. So when I was in New Jersey, for Minds in Real Life in late 2019 or mid 2019, um, I'm sure you've heard of Megan Murphy, Justin. Yeah. Anyway, so I was sitting on a panel with her, and I disagreed with pretty much everything she said, because even though a lot of the things that she said were actually true, she was approaching them from a false premise, right? So it's basically like the sky is blue because somebody painted it that way, right? Like, yeah, the sky is blue, but it's not because somebody painted it that way. Like she has a lot of positions, right? Solid positions, but I don't think that they come from a solid foundational premise. Uh, but like, we ran into each other at the airport on our way home at the gate lounge, and sat down and had a very friendly glass of wine together while we were waiting for our flights. And like, there is room for viewing other people, regardless of how misguided you think they might be, regardless of how stupid or ignorant you think they might be, right? To just view them as other people. And, this is a person, I'm a person. We can make a human connection over a glass of wine at an airport lounge, while we're waiting for a flight, and just discuss mundane things, not get into politics, all of those things, right? And so basically, I think that a lot of that has been lost, right? A lot of that idea that you can view the opposing side as human beings, who maybe you don't agree with them, maybe you think that they're 100% misguided, maybe you're wrong, maybe they're right about a few things, and you're wrong about a few things. But like, this idea of dialogue, um civil dialogue between individuals who have opposing viewpoints, that's like going out the fucking window.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And there's all this talk about cancel culture. We don't want to start committing it sort of on our side, right, against the people we don't agree with. And as you say, sometimes you are wrong. Not you, Karen, you're never wrong. But sometimes I'm wrong, and sometimes other people are wrong. And so just being open-minded is so critical. And so that's kind of written into our statement of values, for what it's worth, that we value peaceful dialogue as the best way to come to truth, however you want to define that. And that is one of the approaches that we take, is we don't shut people out just because they start in a different place from us. We try to find common ground. If we can, we bring them towards us. If we can't, well, maybe we've learned something in the process and we move on, look for other partners.
Can I just come in here really quick?
Yes.
Remember, this is a call-in show, and we've gone for about an hour. So for those of you guys who
Actually,
are
considering the late start, it's more like
it wasn't that late.
40 minutes.
It's been
I was fairly late.
about I started like 10 minutes late. At the most. But
So it's been 45 minutes. That's 3/4 of an hour, Brian. You're wrong.
Yeah, it was about 15 minutes late.
Shame on you, Brian.
all right, well, anyway, what I'm saying is
Oh, Brian.
this is a call-in show, and there are, I think, at least 3 people that are queued in. I also have a super chat from
Yeah, we're
Master
only taking
Rogue
3 callers.
Okay, we're only going to take those 3.
Yeah, pretty much. And anybody else can just text a question, just because I don't want this to go too long.
Well, that's why I'm cutting in, because I know that if I don't, you guys will just talk for 3 or 4 hours. So
Yeah, because we're all women here.
I mean,
And
I
we
wasn't
just
gonna say it.
yawn.
I wasn't gonna say it out loud, but
We just flap
yes.
our gums.
Yep, just
Blah, blah, blah.
talk about
Blah,
the,
blah, blah.
the latest gossip, the latest digs on this person. I heard from my neighbor that so and so, but we want to get into the call. So there is a link in the description, guys. If you want to call in, just go to the link below in the description of this stream, and then you'll be able to enter the screening room. You don't have to enter the call itself. If you're a little shy, just send us a text question, or you could send it as a super chat, either through the super chat function, or you can send it through PayPal, and then Allison will get it. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. If you have questions for Prim, Justin, Karen, Allison, yeah, just follow all of those prompts, or at least one of them. Okay, I'm done. I'm gonna shut up now.
All right, so do you want to get let's get the first one in.
Mhm.
I just have to do a little bit of business here.
Okay.
Oh, by the way,
I'm in the
Master Rogue says Prim for $2. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Hi. Okay. Well, so I can go ahead and do the dragging and stuff then if you have business. So I'm looking in the questions now. And it looks like Adam's Girl 75 is first. So go ahead and get ready. I'm going to pull you into the show channel right now. And there we go. Hello. Hi, good to see you. So I don't know if you would prefer to read your question out loud for everybody.
Yes, I am from Alabama, and so I was wondering if how can I bring more awareness to domestic violence for men, as well as what can I do to help in for Cafe?
Well,
That's
that's
a question we always like to hear.
yes.
I could take a stab at an answer to the first. I mean, the first question you had two. The first one we all could comment on. So, in terms of bringing awareness, I advocate for basically starting almost at home, literally in some cases. Make sure that the people that you interact with on a regular basis are aware of the issue. Don't assume that they know the statistics. They're not going to read it very commonly in the mainstream media. So that's a good place to start. If that's a good place to start. And once you've done that, if you want to get involved in kind of more of an organized movement, there are lots of organizations in the States. I know there are some in Alabama. There's Honey Badgers. There's Cafe. We're mostly in Canada. We've got some activities outside of the borders. If you've got some financial ability, you might do something to raise public awareness. Sometimes advertising campaigns, if they're done in a strategic way, you don't need to put a lot of money into that because the media is likely to pick it up because it is so unusual. So that might be a way to kind of bootstrap a conversation where there isn't one taking place. You might do that in coordination with one of the local men's issues or men's rights organizations. So those are just some ideas.
Does writing a superhero novel tackling male SA count?
Probably. This is one of the things that Warren Farrell. Okay, when I started my blog, my now husband, while I was at work one night, decided he was going to send my first blog post to Warren Farrell, and I came home and he said, "You're going to be so mad at me," and I was like, "What did you do?" And he said, "I sent your blog post to Warren Farrell," and I was like, "I'm gonna frickin' kill you. I will smother you with a pillow." Right. But then about 15 minutes later, Warren Farrell came back and said, "Hey, this is really great. And you write fiction. So maybe you should write some fiction that promotes men's and boys' issues." Right. And I didn't do that. But okay. Um,
But
I
you did
put up
wear an
my
onion on your belt because it was a style at the
I
time.
tied an onion on my belt because it was the style at the time. But I started a YouTube channel, and one of the things that happened to me, and this is one of the things that you could do, is I put up my video, Feminism and the Disposable Male, was my second video ever, and somebody posted it on Reddit's R videos, and with the heading, "This video changed how I view gender and society." Right? And overnight, I had thousands of new subscribers. Right? So, what I would suggest that you could do to raise awareness, because there are a whole bunch of social experiments that have been videotaped out there of men beating on their women in public and getting a beat down from the men in the vicinity, and women beating on their men in public and getting ridiculed and laughed at and ignored, right? those, I would suggest that you share those with a little caption saying, this has made me think about things, right? Or this has made me rethink how gender works, or whatever. Share it on social media, because that actually, it has a huge reach. You know, it those kinds of videos are going to affect people more deeply, at least in terms of their psychology, their emotions, than dry statistics.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the personal appeal is so critical. And what I'd suggest is if you know any men who are victims of some form of intimate partner violence, and they're willing to speak about their experiences. So if they're willing to speak publicly about their experiences.
I actually do. I have a coworker that I work with, and he was in a very, very bad relationship. But me and him don't exactly get along. So that may be a little bit more difficult. So
Okay, well,
you might send him over to us.
some ass, I guess.
But the point, I guess, is whoever works with him, if he's open to it. Obviously, we don't want to put anybody in a situation where they're, because it can be traumatic to speak publicly about it. But some men actually find it rather cathartic to open up about it and know that they're helping other men get help, because a lot of men think they're alone. When they hear, oh, somebody else like me has been affected by this, they're more likely to get help for themselves. So what's been very good at attracting men over to our programs is men telling their stories, whether it's domestic abuse, false allegations, parental alienation, just to name a few themes. And it's very, they talk about it on a personal level. Would he be willing to do that, do you think?
I have no idea. I'll have to ask him, but he was a victim of like emotional and verbal, a lot of that abuse, as well as, honestly, I think a little bit of intimate partner SA as well. And at least from an outsider looking in. But yeah, I would have to severely kiss his ass in order to get him to talk.
okay. Well, that just to get that kind of a personal testimonies is just like they were saying, it's very, very powerful. And I wanted to thank you, Adam's Girl 75, for coming on and bringing what she brought to the table. And I'm going to put you back into the other room so that we can bring on our next guest, or that Prim can bring our next guest. So thank you again. And
just briefly, as for how you can help Cafe in its activism, because we don't want to miss that other part of it. There's lots of different ways you can do that. You can share Cafe's content. You can talk to others about what's going on up in Canada, and maybe hopefully it'll expand in the US. But I think also our programs are always looking for like funding and supporters as well. So there's always that option available up on the Canadian Association for Equality website. So yeah,
thank you, Prim.
Just wanted to make sure to add that in there before we got to the next one.
Okay, and yeah, thank you, Prim. I also wanted to say that I think fiction has a place too, in terms of developing narratives. It's a more safe way to explore these ideas and internalize them without having to have them right in your face. Even testimony can be very challenging to people. It's much more impactful, but it can be very challenging as well. And I find that in many cases, fiction really gets people thinking. So her idea of doing like a novel based on some of these ideas, I think, is a really good one. And it's something that I'm pursuing as well, and creating a writers group around this. So around the concept. But do you want to bring in the next one, whichever one that you would like, Prim?
Sure, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. So the next one looks like it's from J Willie or J Will. Sorry, I'm trying to get it pronounced right, but yeah. So I will go ahead and bring presumably him in here, and then you can go ahead and ask your question. So 3, 2, 1. There we go. Hopefully we can hear you. I know.
Uh-oh.
Yes, you can hear me. Hello.
Hey, there you are.
Hi. Yeah, so the question I had was that, my question. Organizations that focus on mass issues like Cafe often couch their points with, we don't want to take anything away from women. But if we are going to be completely honest with ourselves, would we by necessarily have to?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what you have in mind. Of course, because we have a different ideological or philosophical position than others who support women, provide services to women, we would be competing in the marketplace of ideas with them, and we would probably, frankly, want to replace some of the services currently being offered to women with ones that were not indoctrinating women into seeing men as the enemy, for example. So in that sense, we would take those programs away. We would replace them with programs that would help women but not harm men. So I think part of my answer would be the only things we would want to take away would be the things that are doing both women and men a disservice. But if what you're asking is like, is there a limited pie and we have to cut it in different ways, I mean, economically and financially, I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's a lot of financial support for social services. It's really a question of expanding the existing support to make sure that populations currently that the services aren't available for are also included. I mean, right now in Ontario, the Ontario government could fund our shelter if they wanted to. They have the financial means to do that. It's just that they're mandated. They're legally mandated not to. The shelter funding mandate is limited to women's shelters. So there is funding for it if you look at the provincial budget. I'm just talking about what I know well, which is our work to try to get more financial support for our work, for our programs. It's not that the funding isn't available, it's that it gets exclusively assigned to a certain population and not to others. So I think the pie can be grown so that everybody who legitimately needs support is getting it.
Well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you, Justin. Right? Because you can't cut the baby in half. Right? And so when women are when they're accustomed to getting full custodial, full physical custody of their kids, right? And then you suddenly tell them, no, now you have to share, right? What you get are these wine fests, like they published at The Guardian, where it's like, ooh, the agony of being a 50-50 mom, right? Okay.
That article was the worst.
Oh, God, it was awful, right? And it's like, oh, really? How about being a 0% mom, right? Because that's what men have been dealing with. They've been dealing with being 0% dads, 0% custody dads, for the longest time. And, all of these kinds of things, like there are some things where the pie can't be grown, right? It can't be expanded. That you literally have to cut the baby in half. And women are not going to like that. They are not going to like that. So.
Yeah, I guess I took the questions more to be resources in the economic sense, because that's often the criticism we hear is if you provide funding for men's programs, that has to come at the expense of women's programs. And I'll get to Karen's point because it's a really interesting one in just a moment. But I just want to emphasize that, in my opinion, maybe it's a provocative one. I think a lot of the social services, especially the gendered ones, are really financially inefficient. And actually, the way that they're currently, the framework is a faulty one, and they don't, in fact, actually they don't actually do the things they set out to do. So, for example, the way the women's shelters often are working is women are in and out of those shelters. They're not being, trained in terms of becoming independent. So I think there's a lot of, frankly, money that's, I don't want to say wasted, but it's being used in an inefficient way. and if it was used in an efficient way, and if programs were run based on evidence of efficacy, then I think we actually do have more than enough money to fund programs that actually work and do good for men and women and families in general. Now, the more difficult question about the winner-take-all areas, like maybe family court's a good example of that. I would say even there, the public policies right now are, in my opinion, are not to women's advantage either, not in the long run. I mean, women, they may think that they're getting the upper hand, but what tends to happen is family court presumes that women are, in all cases, meant to be stay-at-home moms, frankly. And that actually fosters a cycle of dependency on alimony and child care from the dad. It's not actually, in my opinion, doing women any service in the long run, or
Yeah,
the
but
cause of women's
what the
hind any
women
service in the
want.
long run.
That's the problem. Is it's that's what the women want. Like I said this to Michael Kimmel at the New York premiere of the Red Pill, right? That nobody's forcing any woman to seek full custody of her child. Nobody forces a woman to do that. She does it because she wants to, right? And the man takes the deal. He gets visitation and maybe guardianship if he's lucky, right? Every other weekend plus Wednesday evenings, right? Because that's what he gets and that's the best deal he can get, right? And so those women aren't going after that because they don't want it. They're going after it because they do want it. And so you literally are taking something away from women if you go for a rebuttable presumption of 50-50 custody, right?
Yeah, you're right, Karen.
Yeah.
And there has to be some room for a discussion of, okay, women can't just get everything. There has to be like a compromise between women's needs, children's needs, men's needs, society's needs. Yeah. And there has to be a certain discussion of responsibility that women need to take. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I really, really think that, that this focus that that women should have had the full pie on a lot of these things in the first place is, just automatically wrong, right? Like it should never have been that women always get all custody. Like children should always have access to both parents, barring very obvious scenarios of abuse or things like that. Don't misquote me on that one. But like it should never have been an assumption that only women need these services or that only women need custody of the children. So like talking about it as though like we're taking away rights from women, it's like, no, we're just trying to make things, more balanced as they probably should have been from the beginning. Like that's the way I choose to see it.
Yeah, that's a good way. No, go ahead.
When I look at it, like it used to be that men had default custody after divorce because they had default financial responsibility for the children after divorce. And, but women got default custody and like they got both pies. They got the custody pie and they got the I'm fully supported with alimony and child support pie, right? So like they got both pies, right? Men got the pie of custody, but they also had to pay for that pie, right? Whereas women, they got the pie, they didn't have to pay for it, basically, right? And so, I mean, like when the framing of this in the media is that this is an injury to women to suggest that they should have to share custody with the fathers of their children. And it's like I always felt like if I have the full custody pie, I should have the full child support pie, right? Like I should be the person who's fully responsible pie, right?
When people say it's an injury to women, which females? What about the daughters?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like who do you choose to?
This is the problem, right? Is that the interests of the children are subordinate to the interests of the mothers, and the interests of the mothers are based on what the mothers want in the moment,
Yeah,
Right?
and
Isn't it?
this brings up
That's
something
my
that
point. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
this brings up something that I point out. Like, a lot of people seem to have this aversion to saying, well, what if this situation is under women's control? What if women do need to take responsibility? What if women can't get everything they want? Why can't we talk about that? Like, why is it such a problem with talking about responsibilities that women have to men, to children, to society? And the other thing is, I wanted to say something to directly address the point that Jay Willie made. There is a sort of a phenomenon that I've observed that does sort of pit recognition of men's issues against the people or the services, creating services for people. And this isn't something that's exclusive to feminism. And I'll use an example. The example I use is Dutch Oxfam. And there was a doctor, I believe, and he was part of a group that dealt with survivors of sexual assault in war-torn areas. So these are horribly abused individuals who've experienced basically sexual assault in the context of war crimes. And this doctor would help not just women, but also men who had experienced being raped in war. And when it was made known that he was actually helping a lot of men, because there were a lot of men coming to him, because there is a huge rate of this kind of thing happening in war. In fact, we don't even really know, because in many cases, the male victims are also killed. They're not just raped. Anyway, when it was discovered by his donors, or the people who were supporting him, that he was helping male victims, they came to him, specifically Dutch Oxfam came to him and said, if the number of men that he helps ever exceeds 30% of his victims, they're going to cut his funding. And they're not just going to cut his funding to the men, they're going to cut his funding to the women. So they were willing to sacrifice all the women that he was helping, just so they could maintain the illusion that they were helping mostly or only women. And this is the thing. Like, this mentality isn't just damaging to men. I called it. Yeah, I called it the negative sum game. The negative sum game isn't just damaging to men, because we don't want to see the male victims. We are willing to sacrifice the female victims in favor of seeing something as a purely female issue. And this is something I see over and over and over again. And people reveal it we would talk about the harms that Islam does to men, or like radical Islam does to men. People would say that we were excusing Islam. We were engaging in Islamic apologetics. And it's like, well, because we say there's twice as many victims. And I realized it's because when you include the male victims in an issue, it recedes in importance, in moral importance to people's minds. If you can frame an issue as majority female victimhood, or even better, if you can frame it as women being victims of it because they're women, people respond so much more to that framing. And this is something that, it's like, it is not feminist. In fact, I would say feminists exploit that.
They exploit it. It's
a great example from today, literally. And of course, we could come up with lots of these, but it did happen today in Vancouver. CBC Vancouver reports on new research into cases of stranger violence, violence committed by somebody not known to the victim. And literally, the headline was 23% of victims were female. That was the way it was framed. They had to squeeze in some mention of female victimization in order for people to take the story more seriously. So even though over 70%, like 3.5 times more, were men, that should be the natural, headline or the leading paragraph. It was framed as another story of female victimization.
My opinion, the reason why this is the case is because as we have an potentially instinctive, possibly also socialized tendency to want to protect women and provide for women.
Instinctive plus socialized. It's a feedback loop, Alison. It's a positive feedback loop. It's a cascading positive feedback loop, like global warming.
Yeah. And so we have this instinct that we want to, and it starts with probably an instinct to protect and provide for women. And this is like, this is fundamental, because part of how we evolved as human beings is that we had men provisioning women, or male hominids provisioning male hominids, and then that sort of jump started the whole pair bonding and everything. So,
Well, and
I mean, there's
also, where did every infant learn affection, love, tenderness,
yeah.
nurturing? At its mother's breast, at its
Yeah.
mother's knee, right?
Yeah,
So
and the so we have these instincts, we have these desires to protect and provide for women. That's why they do that, because they want to make people care about something. So when we bring men into the picture, we're fighting against that. We're fighting against, and then it's not feminist. It is something older than feminist. It's deeper than feminist, because I don't think feminists invented that in the 60s. They exploited it, and they denied it existed, which is sort of galling, but whatever.
yeah, they deny it exists while
But
they exploit it.
we're fighting against that in order to get men's services. And in the context of an overarching framework that denies that it even exists. So it's like, it can be it's like multiple layers of frustration. And so getting back to what Jay Willie said, I think that is true. There is an element of, if we bring attention to men, that somehow we're taking away something from women. And it's because of this. It's because of that Dutch Oxfam example. If we bring attention to men, if we give services to men, there is a possibility that people will want to remove services entirely.
So if I could just say one quick last word, at least from me on this, I think on a case-by-case basis, there are lots of instances where the right thing to do is the thing that an individual woman doesn't want to have done. Like the example we were talking about earlier, having to do with, this is going to be a case of shared parenting and you're not going to have 100% custody, even though you think that's what you want. What I was also adding, though, is that I think in the long run, and maybe I'm an optimist here, I think the policies we advocate, both Cafe Honey Badgers and those who are allied with us, is in the best interest of all of society. So I think one example of that is what I was saying earlier, which females, when you have a public policy that hurts children, you're also hurting young girls, and that's going to have an intergenerational effect. So in the long run, policies around equal parenting or supporting male victims of violence in a male positive way, those will have consequences throughout the generations, which will be good for men and for women. So philosophically, that's my position.
Well,
We do
yeah,
things
exactly.
for men on their own terms. We just also believe that in the long run, they're good for everybody.
I think so too. And but the problem is that convincing the public, okay, because I'm just gonna steal a George Carlin quote and say, think of the average person and how stupid they are, and then realize that half of all humans are dumber than that.
Well, we
right?
make these decisions
Yeah, for sure.
emotionally. We want to protect and provide for women. I'm just gonna finish this, but just to add to because I know what you're gonna say, Prim. Just to add to Justin's point, like again, the Duxfam example, take away all services, including those services that women need, in service of seeing the issue in a particular way. That doesn't actually help women. If we are trying to serve an ideological or something that's informed by something that isn't based on reason or observation, then we aren't actually helping the victims of the problem. We're actually denying fundamental aspects of it and possibly making the situation even worse. Okay, I know you need to bring the next one.
A really great example is LGBT victims of domestic violence. They get totally left out because domestic violence is only committed by a man against a woman. That's the conventional wisdom. So there's no room for violence in gay and lesbian relationships.
Yes,
So,
this is something that was in my paper that I published.
Did I ever tell you guys about my experience at the 2012 National Organization for Women Conference? They had a panel discussion about the bad bill versus the good bill, because the the Violence Against Women Act was up for reauthorization, and there were changes made by the Democrats, and then that was the good bill, and there were changes made by the Republicans, that was the bad bill, right? And some of the changes made by Republicans were to ungender a bunch of stuff, right? But there was a lesbian who was on the panel who spoke, and she said, like, the language of domestic violence does not serve my community. The language of male victims and female perpetrators is completely absent. And does not serve my community. Like, female perpetrators cannot get government funded batterer treatment, right? And male victims can't get government funded battered victims services, right? Because of this framework, right? She was frozen out of the fucking room. She was like, nobody applauded her. Nobody applauded her. And then she said, okay, I can't take any questions because I have to make a flight. And she freaking fled. She freaking ran out of the room.
Yeah, but I think Prim is really angling. Like I could see Prim reaching for the next
before
person
she
to
said
come.
that. Before she said that, she said, well, I'm not saying that domestic violence isn't gendered. Of course it's gendered. And then she gets like a smattering of lukewarm applause, right? And then she's like made her excuses and fucking hightailed it out of there, right? And I was
Karen.
just like sitting there going, okay, well, this is where we're at. Yeah.
Okay,
All
yes,
right.
and where we're at now is we need the next person to come in.
So yeah, on behalf of Justin, I just know that he's not feeling terribly well and is wanting to leave. But I also know that the last question that we have in the screening room is specifically for Justin. So I just wanted to get that in here before he has to leave. So this is a question from, oh gosh, I'm definitely going to butcher this, Flagen first. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them in now. And here we go. Okay, so you're in this show channel now. Hopefully we can hear you.
First.
One, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, speak up a little bit or get closer to the mic.
I will get closer to the mic. This is a question for Justin. What is your opinion of the age restriction female domestic abuse shelters have on boys, that is the ones that actually accept boys to begin with? And how do you think equivalent shelters for men should handle it?
Okay, thank you, Fetal first.
That's a really great question, and it's something we tackled when we were planning to open our shelter. It's one of many kind of operational details. It's more than a detail, but there's so many decisions you have to make when opening a facility that's so complicated, and that's why we built that advisory board that I mentioned earlier, and have access to some knowledge and know-how across the sector. And we actually looked at this question of why do women's shelters, when they do accept when they're family shelters and when they do accept opposite gender children, why do they boot out the males at a certain age? Sometimes it's 16, sometimes it's 12, somewhere in that range. And there didn't seem to be any evidence-based rationale for it. So trying to be evidence-based ourselves, we decided we were not going to use that same policy. And we don't have such a policy. So when we opened, we started welcoming all kinds of families. And so, in fact, we have had not just daughters over the age of 12 or 16, but even adult dependent daughters. And even more than that, we've had dads who have brought in their parents, so the grandparents of their kids, because the dad, he's working, he might need the extra help. And this is a non-starter in most family shelters. They're very tight about who they allow in. We don't just let anybody in. I mean, people's safety is at stake, but we are much more open and more willing to treat healing as a whole family pursuit, and not just the shelter, but various of the support programs and the counseling and other mental health programs. We often do involve more than just the man, but his children, his spouse, the rest of his family, or his friends, whomever is there to be a positive support to that man, we think has a role to play in helping him through his crisis. And that's the approach we take.
Yeah, and I mean, also, it's heartbreaking. Just as somebody who works in like providing resources for the community, I work in 211, and that's the line that provides community resources to people, and having to hear those people who call in and be like, I need shelter, but I have like a teenage boy and I can't take him. It's just like it's heartbreaking to hear that kind of thing. It's not it's not fair, and it's something that we've been really working to try and mitigate as much as possible, because there's nothing more traumatic than already going through a traumatic situation only to find out you can't leave with your children that you're also trying to protect. And I can't imagine what that must be like for people. So
it's an impossible catch-22 to leave your child behind with an abuser, or to stay and subject yourself to continued abuse. And I'll just add that we very much want to affect the whole public dialogue about male healing, like make it acceptable for men to ask for help, make sure that family members, that's the place to start, are aware that men have problems and that they're there to support them. So when a man reaches out to us, but he wants to use our services with a female or a male loved one to support him, it would be contrary to our whole, principle to say no to that, right? Because we want to encourage that. We want to encourage not just the man, but his whole circle of support to step up on his behalf.
yeah, and of course, like that's a major reason why, as we talked about earlier, a lot of men really don't seek help because they aren't able to take their children with them. So that's, by solving this for like all people, then we're just going to wind up having better outcomes in general. So hopefully we can kind of pave the way for, just better results across the board. That's the goal.
Well, actual science-based or observation-based, and not refusing half the data, it will probably help with that. But I wanted to thank Fegan first for his question. No, it's not Fleegan. It's not Fleegan. It's not Fleegan. It's Fegan.
It's
Fegan
Fleegan.
first. It's Fegan
first.
Sorry for butchering that.
No, it's Fegan first. I've asked him multiple times now, Karen.
Oh my God! Then why is there an L in there?
Because he wants to destroy the brains of the average English speaker. He just wants to turn his name into a brown note for English speakers. All right. So thank you again, Fegan first, and I think that's pretty much. We don't want to make Justin suffer any longer.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no,
for
he
coming
definitely
on with
sounds
us.
like he has a. Do you have the beer bug, Justin? Do you have the coof? Do you have the delta? Do you have the thing?
Something's going through my house, and we've all been sick for a few days, so I hope it's not serious. I don't think it is.
Have you been tested, Justin?
My daughter was tested today because they won't let her back into her daycare until she has a clean bill of health. So we'll know through her test whether the whole house has it or not.
All I know is that we all had it early 2020. Me, my husband, and my younger son, who was still living with us and is still frickin' living with us. And then my son got a cold week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And of course he had to go and get tested. Because that's what you have to do to be responsible when you work at Walmart, unloading trucks. And it was negative. And then I got sick, and then my husband got sick, and we're all sick. So, but it's just a cold.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you so much
There's still such a thing as a cold in the age of COVID.
Poor Prim. All right.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been really great. It's been a really great show.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
No problem.
Talk again soon.
I'm sorry to butt in here, but I did get a super chat, which is a question. So I thought I'd put this out there really quick. Philarator gives us $20 Canadian. Thank you, Philarator, for your kind donation. And he says, Erin Pitsey maintains, as she has since the 1970s, that domestic violence is a generational issue, not a gender one. Comments? Is it at that?
I think we can field that one if Justin wants to head off here and go tend to himself and his family.
I got to go attend to my next generation. So I agree with Aaron Pizzi 100%, but I'm sure Prim can do justice to that point of view. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night, Justin.
All right. So yeah, anyway, just to kind of respond to that, I can definitely agree with that. Like I think, even just with how parents have reared their children over the years, right? Like it's corporal punishment used to be a much more common thing, for example. So violence was, much more normalized, like even 50 years ago, right? And obviously further back. So I think that it's definitely fair to say that like people being raised in more violent environments would have been more generational and much more common before. It's certainly not a gender one, because as the research is showing more and more, this is something that is impacted by that affects both men and women. And sure, they always like to have that disclaimer in there that women experience more like serious physical violence, but
or more fear.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But it's still something that happens to both, and both genders deserve to have it sufficiently dealt with and to have resources for that, right? So
I would also say it's generational, not just in the behavioral sense, the observational sense, where it's like you're a little kid and your parents are screaming at each other all the time and hitting each other and things like that, right? And you sort of learn that violence is the way to resolve conflict. I think that there's also a genetic component to it, a hereditary component to it, that if your parents are like that, maybe there's something in their genetics that makes them like that, and they're more likely to pass that down to you, right? So I think, because psychopathy, sociopathy, narcissistic, cluster B personality disorders, right? Borderline, all of those things, right? There's a genetic component to all of those things, and all of those things are positively associated with or correlated with being physically and psychologically abusive with others, right? So it's generational, and it would be the only way that we can, like, we're never going to get rid of it entirely, because if there's a genetic component to it, you're never going to get rid of it entirely. But minimizing the normalization of it within a child's life, so that he's not observing, or she is not observing, the conflict resolution playbook as solely one of screaming and beating on the other person. I think that that's very much something that is that's really the only way we can really tackle the problem, because it's very hard to adjust genetics, right? But
yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to get rid of it altogether. So
Yeah. Well, and I mean, also, if you think about it, there is that problem where, um, women's violence towards men is often treated like a joke or not that big of a deal. So like that's another thing that really feeds into all of that.
They did a study with psychologists where they just fed them a bunch of vignettes, like little verbal, like text scenarios, right? Of abusive behaviors. One partner snooping on their partner's cell phone, snuck into their cell phone and looked at who they were texting with and kept tabs on them, and hacked their email, and and all of these things, right? And yelled at them and accused them of cheating, and all of this stuff, right? And every single scenario, the psychologists were more likely to describe the behavior as abusive if it was the man doing it to the woman than if it was the woman doing it to the man, right?
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And if we can't have that kind of consistency, then there's never going to be that kind of pressure to change the behavior or to say, you know, no, this is wrong and stop doing it. So yeah, that's a whole other aspect. But yeah, anything to add, Alison?
I think Allison's going pee. Or maybe she's looking after her dog.
Oh, gotcha.
Allison's told me to go ahead and close us out when you guys were done talking.
Yeah,
about
I was
that
actually
question.
looking after the dog.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I figured it was either you peeing or the dog peeing.
Yeah, the dog is definitely a very highly labor-intensive animal.
Only for now.
Only for now, okay.
All of the work now, and then it will be very much easier to get along with dog.
Yeah, and we're also planning to get a cart that he can pull.
Nice.
Oh, you should.
We can
put him to work.
We can tool around town in our dog cart.
That's so cool.
Being pulled by a giant German Shepherd.
Nice.
Wow, why don't you teach him to sing a Negro spiritual while you're at it, you slave driver?
Oh my god! Oh my goodness!
What? Oh my god! Well, you know what? I guarantee Ryan. He's going to be happy in his slavery. I guarantee it. He'll probably be pulling the cart out. Like, yeah, like get me in the cart.
You know,
Thomas Jefferson said the same thing about his slaves.
Most dogs pull no matter what
tonight.
you do. You just want them to walk at a gentle pace, and they're yanking your arm off. So I don't have a problem with, I should have thought of this, riding a cart.
Yep. Get a parasol and a mint julep. Just ride your dog cart.
Yeah. Kevin would be great.
No, the truth is, dogs love working. They do. They like it more than humans.
They really like running. They really like going. They really like.
Yeah, it just occurred to me.
They've seen it all before, right? They've sniffed every tree before. They've seen every house before. They've met every dog behind every fence before, right? But every day is a new adventure. And they rush out to get it. It's like they're like little kids.
Hey, here's a thought. Here's a hot take. If humans were like dogs, communism might work.
No, because get a second dog and give them one food bowl.
All right.
To share.
Oh no, I wouldn't do that. Yeah, you're right. They have a sense of property.
Oh, okay. Do they ever?
Yeah.
Okay, this has gotten really off topic though.
A little bit. I was just going to say, given that we have no more questions, if we're going to be closing out really quickly, I just wanted to say something first. I just wanted to say, first of all, like, thank you for like having this show. Like this has kind of really meant a lot to me because, like I said earlier in the show, HBR and Cafe have both always been a really like important part of my life. And I'll be honest, with the drama from before, it kind of felt a little bit like mommy and daddy were fighting a little bit. So it's been nice to have everybody talking together on the show, just to remind everybody what it is we're all working for. And like, it's just been a really nice conversation. So just wanted to end on that really ultra gay note.
Yeah. Well, I did want to, I don't think that I think we called the video in question out, but I allowed for the possibility, that Cafe just made a massive blunder. But also we could call it dogumism. Dog communism. Yeah. There you go. That's totally inane. I leave it out there. Okay. All right, Brian, do you have any last thoughts? Oh wait, I think
Did
Karen's
Brian just yell banana?
No, he yelled beta. He's just calling me a freaking cuck.
Yeah. Oh no, you're a total cuck, Alison.
Yes.
Don't ask me to explain why and how, but you are total cuck.
But I can only think of the obvious, but that also is a little bit baffling. Okay, Brian is just making sounds now, so it's probably time.
I was like, did Satan take over your mic?
No.
No, say it again. Everybody be quiet and you play.
Very disappointed.
I'll play it one more time.
Okay.
I'm very disappointed.
It's from,
What's it from?
RoboCop.
Oh, okay,
Dick?
yeah.
I'm very disappointed. Okay.
All right.
So, what's next?
Your sound
what do we do?
quality sucks.
Most of the sound clips are fine. Some of them are not as good quality-wise, so it's not
All
really.
right.
Yeah.
That's not really here nor there, but here, if you enjoy this content and you want to make sure that it continues.
Who would?
Okay, I'm patenting dogumism. Okay. Please go to feedthebadger.com. You can get a subscription to get after show or patron only content. There's hours and hours of it, or join the patron community. And you could also do one-time support options to make sure that these shows keep coming and we keep working towards a world in which men, compassion for men isn't a strange concept. And isn't easily dismissed by saying, "Oh, well, man, the society is the society is
coded.
This society is constructed for their benefit, so why should we give a shit?" Anyway, I'll hand it back to Brian. Let's take us out.
All right.
Gay!
What?
Okay, so if you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Why am I having trouble? Hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, and most importantly, share this video. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of Men's Mental Health, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.